Welcome, dear listeners, to a very special program. We are honored to have Professor Garret Field here with us in the studios at the SLBC. Professor Garret is no stranger to the SLBC, having graced the studios before. And a very warm welcome to Professor Garret Field this afternoon. Thank you for visiting the SLBC, the oldest radio station in Asia and the second oldest in the world. We are honored to have you here today, Professor.
Thank you so much, Mario, for having me. Thank you, SLBC. And I also wish to thank the Director of the English Service, Miss Priyadarshini Lokuliana, for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Garret. And before we begin this very special program, let me introduce Professor Garret to you, dear listeners out there. Professor Garret Field's scholarship explores the history of song and poetry in Sri Lanka and the Maldives, with particular attention to Sinhala and Divehi language texts. Dr. Field has also published on how musicians improvise in South Indian classical music. He has received support for his research from the Fulbright Hays Award, the Ohio University's Baker Fund Award, and 2 Sinhala language instruction grants from the American Institute for Sri Lankan Studies. Professor Garret Field is the author of Modernizing Composition, Sinhala Song, Poetry and Politics in 20th Century Sri Lanka. It was published in the series South Asia Across the Disciplines. He has published research articles in many peer-reviewed journals including Analytical Approaches to World Music, Anthropological Linguistics, Ethnomusicology Review, Ethnomusicology Translations, the Journal of Asian Studies, Modern Asian Studies, and South Asia Research Journal 2, together with the Journal of South Asian Studies, the South Asianist, and the Sri Lanka Journal of the Humanities. Professor Garret Field received his Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Michigan in the USA, his Master of Music from the Wesleyan University, and his Doctor of Philosophy degree from the Wesleyan University as well. Professor Garret, we are honored by your presence here at the SLBC. Professor Garret, tell us all about ethnomusicology. I know it's very difficult to sum it up in a few minutes over the airwaves, but for our listeners out there, what really is ethnomusicology?
Thank you so much, Mario, for this wonderful question. The field of ethnomusicology was basically created around the 1950s, and it was created because scholars wanted to study music outside of the Western European countries. And they were also interested in studying music that was not like the Western European classical music. So scholars started to, from the US, started to go, and also from Western Europe, started to go to India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and to learn the music of those countries. And that is how the field began.
And in ethnomusicology, Professor, what are the key areas of study?
Yes. So ethnomusicology, Mario, is a little bit different from musicology because in ethnomusicology, the discipline traditionally was a combination with the field of anthropology. So people would go to a certain location and work with music like an anthropologist would work with cultural things. So do interviews and like record music and like that. So there's that connection with anthropology.
So, Professor, music then is not just only for entertainment, but with music one can study societies, human groups, even histories, if I'm not mistaken then.
Exactly, Mario. Exactly.
And that's what ethnomusicology does in a way as well.
Perfectly right, yes.
So, Professor Garret, what brings you to Sri Lanka, this small island, so many miles away from the USA?
Well, this time, Mario, my wife had an opportunity. She's pursuing a PhD in education, and she received a scholarship to do her dissertation research at the University of Colombo. And I also had the opportunity to give some lectures at the University of Colombo, Peradeniya, Kelaniya, and Rajarata University about a particular subject.
So, Professor, in terms of your research work in Sri Lanka, if you could just tell our listeners why Sri Lanka is such a fascinating site for ethnomusicology studies.
Thank you so much, Mario, for that question. Personally think that Sri Lanka is extremely unique because in my field, often we talk about India, and often the theories that we use are applicable to India. So for me, Sri Lanka always offers a different variation from what we find in regions of India. And for me, that's always given me a particular angle at which I can make an intervention into my academic discipline.
So, Professor, you told us that you've been to the SLBC before and you've been at the archives as well. Can you tell our listeners about that fascinating experience in your research here?
Of course. So, Mario, I would like to really express my gratitude to SLBC when I was conducting my dissertation research in Sri Lanka in 2010 to 2012. SLBC was like a second home for me. I would come here and I would go to the archives where the records are. I would go to a particular place where you can listen to old recordings. So many people here helped me, and I honestly would never have been able to complete my dissertation research or publish my book without the assistance of SLBC.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's very kind of you to have acknowledged the contribution of the SLBC as well. And we are celebrating 100 years this year as well. And
Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it, Professor?
It is true.
And to the students out there of music, especially in a country like Sri Lanka with, well, I wouldn't say minimal, but with limited resources or access to resources, how could a student pursue studies in ethnomusicology as a Sri Lankan student? Are there opportunities or avenues, locally, if you know, or what is the pathway for someone who's really interested in music to take this dynamic?
Yes, definitely. So what we have, the system works like this in where I am from in the U.S. Usually, if you try to get into an undergraduate institution, most of those, according to my knowledge, are you have to pay. But for graduate studies, like a field like ethnomusicology and other fields in the arts, there are many, many universities that will accept you and give you a stipend. So it's a little bit different from other fields like law and business, where I think usually you have to pay. So there are, if you go onto Google and type in, universities in the U.S. with ethnomusicology programs, you can see there's about maybe 25, 30 options where you can, learn, where you can apply to those. Usually most institutions will accept the TOEFL or the IELTS, because I know that's a question students wonder sometimes. I know it's harder to do the TOEFL in Sri Lanka, but most of these, according to my understanding, all of these institutions will accept the IELTS too.
Thank you, Professor. And Professor, as someone who's an insider and also an outsider in a way, because your work is in the US, but you have such a strong relationship with Sri Lanka, and much of your postgraduate work has been done here as well, as you said. What do you think is important for musicians in Sri Lanka in order to introduce or take this ethnomusicology idea forward here locally?
I think there's so much amazing music in Sri Lanka. All from the folk music to the classical art song. I think it's we saw with Yohani how she became such a big hit. Internationally. There's just so much special music here. I think it just depends on what your goal is and where you want to go and. But there's always that possibility for so many systems. I always think about the the Berapada and the tradition of drumming here is so special, and I still think that only a few ethnomusicologists even really understand that system.
And Professor, is knowing how to play an instrument necessary to pursue such a field of study?
You should, if for me, I always studied like the people like Ananda Samarkand and Sunil Santa and W.D. Amadeva, and then also the lyricists like Chandra Madhavasinghe, Mahagamasekar. So for me, it was more important to like understand Sinhala and Sinhala literature, and also I studied Indian classical music, Carnatic music, so I could understand if there was a raga involved. But if you're going to like study like the dancing traditions or the drumming traditions, then definitely you need to be able to play in the instrument. And that has always been something that ethnomusicologists have focused on is, you have to learn it's so obvious, right? That you need to learn to perform the music if you're going to write about it.
So it's not just about liking music or having an interest in music or a passion in music, but also knowing the craft and the nuances of it. That's very important as well.
Definitely.
So, Professor, what really made Sri Lanka your field of study at that time as a graduate student?
So I completed a master's thesis, Mario, about improvisation in South Indian classical music.
Okay.
Then I completed that, and my advisor said, Garret, in our field, so much has been written about this music. Why don't you do something different? So I then, I think we had YouTube in those days, and I heard W.D. Amaradeva's song Pile Padura, and I thought, no one has written about this. It sounds to me like something special, something classical. What is going on here? So I slowly, started my journey.
That's really amazing, if I put it colloquially, because we take so much for granted being in Sri Lanka, of our rich heritage, our culture, our music as well, and then having you, Professor Garret Field, remind us that we are surrounded by such sources, such treasures of information and culturally significant pieces. It's really inspiring.
I think, it's usually we say in English, the grass is greener on the other side. So like same thing with me, like sometimes people will come to the US and they'll say, wow, like look at this, look at that. And I'll say, I never appreciated that. I think it's like that. So like, as me coming from outside of Sri Lanka, I see things in a different way, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. So, Professor, your trip this time, what did you do on this particular trip? I know it was very difficult to get an appointment with you as well, because you were so busy, I think, delivering so many keynote speeches and workshops and sessions. So can you tell our listeners a bit about what you specifically did this time?
Yeah, so this time I had the wonderful opportunity. I'm so thankful to the University of Colombo, the Sinhala department. I'm so thankful to the University of Peradeniya and University of Kelaniya, and also to Rajarata University. I had the opportunity to give a lecture about a book that Munidasu Kumaratunga wrote in 1939. It was a book called Kavi Shikshava. So this book is all about poetics, about how to write Sinhala poetry. And Munidasu Kumaratunga wrote this book before the free verse movement of Sinhala began. So before Siri Gunasinghe started writing his poetry. So I thought it was so interesting to learn from that book about what did Munidasu Kumaratunga say about good poetry. So I'll give you just one example. He said that really good Sinhala poetry should be sung. And I thought that was so interesting because at least now I often think of poetry as something that is read silently. But as we know, in Sri Lanka, there's a long tradition of singing poetry. So it was very interesting for me to read that book and think about what, in the 1930s, what did Munidasa Kumaratunga consider as good poetry?
And when you say poetry, when talking about poetry being sung, a lot of music is involved in that process as well, not only in terms of notation, but I guess in terms of word choice, intonation, inflection, pause, phrasing, all of that, isn't it, Professor?
Definitely. And so my research also is about poetry. So I write about song and poetry. There's sometimes when I think about today, we have lots of people doing gi vichara, right? So like talking about song and analyzing the meanings of song. So sometimes I wonder if we can connect that to this longer history of talking about poetry, but it might be a stretch. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things.
No, not at all, Professor. Are you a poet?
I don't have really the knowledge to be a good poet, but I read a lot and I try to appreciate it.
And any plans for writing poetry now? No.
Maybe one day I can try if I have time and more knowledge.
Okay, so time is ticking as well. So, Professor Garret Field, we really appreciate you taking time off your busy schedule to be here with us this afternoon and for talking to our listeners, especially about ethnomusicology and Sri Lanka as a whole in that larger that field of ethnomusicology. Before we say bye bye to you, Professor, what is your message to the listeners, but most importantly, the students out there listening to our program?
I think I would like to say, Mario, just keep working hard and study well and always keep that hope that you can accomplish what you wish to accomplish. I think that hope is very important.
Thank you, Professor. And before we wind up, how has your stay in Sri Lanka been this time?
It has been absolutely wonderful. We got to travel. We went to Ambuluwa. We saw lots of beautiful places. We spent time in Maatale, and it's been wonderful.
And will you be back soon?
We hope to be back soon.
Okay, that's wonderful. So we were in conversation this afternoon with Professor Garret Field, whose scholarship explores the history of song and poetry in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Thank you so much, Professor Garret, for taking time off your busy schedule to be with us, be here with us today. And we wish you all the very best and see you soon.
Thank you, Mario. It's my honor.
You just listened to a special program coordinated by Miss Priyadarshini Lokulena, the Director of the English Service of the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. We were in conversation with Professor Garret Field, who graced our studios this afternoon. I am Mario Vijayavardhana, and thank you so much to Miss Prabha for technical assistance this afternoon as well.